Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of Stop, Look, and Listen. I'm your host, LaTroy Gardner. This week, we got a special guest. I mean, he's he's cheesing. He's already playing to the crowd. He's a serial entrepreneur. He's a comedy consultant, an author, podcast host. I mean, he's pretty much worked behind the scenes with some of the biggest names in the comedy world. We have Scott Edwards. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's so exciting to be here with LaTroy. Let's hear it. Yes, thank you. Down and back. No, I appreciate it. That's enough. Hey, it's great to be here on the show. You got a fantastic podcast. LaTroy, I've listened to several of your shows. You always have sharp, professional, interesting people on your podcast. So why am I here?
You got a lot to live up to there, Scott.
I do. I especially like the one you did with Miguel, the jazz musician. I mean, there's so much talent out in the world, and for you to use your podcast to bring it to everybody is amazing. Good job.
Oh, well, I appreciate it. I just try to, be a beacon to others. I love to hear stories. I love to hear from famous people, but then the unsung heroes as well. And, having you on will just add on to that.
Yeah, the unsung heroes. That's where you're leading up to, LaTroy. Don't be subtle. Hey, we have a lot of famous people, and here's the dirtbag out of California. Interesting. On my podcast,
figure it out.
Yeah, on my podcast, I do a lot of stand-up comics, and there's some really funny people that no one's ever heard of because only, as you know, in show business, maybe 1%, 0.5% get that golden ticket and get famous like Harvey or Seinfeld or Leno, but Sinbad. But there's so many, thousands of other people in show business that are not famous, but are really, really funny. In fact, in my intro, we were talking about podcast intros. I talk about presenting the information and interviewing the famous and not so famous.
Right. So why did you jump into podcasting?
Oh, that's a great short story, LaTroy. You perfect way to start things. So I was in stand-up comedy as a producer. I still produce shows, so I guess technically I'm still doing it. But I had a chain of comedy clubs from 1980 to 2001. I did sell out of that corporation. It is still operating, but I'm not at the helm anymore. And during those 21 years, I got a chance to work with some amazing people. And then I went on to other entrepreneurial adventures, and I really missed my days in show business, or what I say on the fringe of show business. And so I spent a couple of years and I wrote a book, sharing some of my stories and talking about some of the people I got a chance to work with. Harry Anderson from Full House and Cheers, and Yakov Smirnoff, a famous Russian comic. And I got done with it, and this is about 1999. I'm getting confused. 2019. And my wife, who's a very smart person, said, "No one's going to read your stupid book. We're not going to spend money publishing that." And I said, and I got, I got hurt and crushed. And she goes, "Do a podcast." And I'm like, what's a podcast? And I've heard of podcasting, but I'd never listened to one. I didn't really understand what it was. And so I started doing some research. And then literally about 3 months before COVID hit, I launched my first podcast. Now I have 5 of them, but I launched my first one. And what was great about podcasting, and LaTroy, I think you mentioned it earlier, it gives you a chance to share stories and information and other people in entertainment to the world.
Right.
I'm an old retired guy in Central California, and I have listeners all over the world. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the part that is hard to grasp sometimes, is that something that you create, in your house or your studio, is amplified and heard, across the pond, and, people are commenting and they're engaging with, something that, you're just doing out of the love of the
Your
profession.
passion, as you mentioned earlier,
Hmm.
that if you have a passion for it and you share it on a podcast. Yeah, I mean, I have listeners in Zimbabwe. I mean, uh, I don't know how I relate to them, but they
Uh-huh.
enjoy the comedy.
I just went to a Zimbabwe wedding last week, as a
No
matter of fact.
way.
For real.
Did
My
anybody ask about me?
yeah. Yeah. They're like, yo, where's the funny white guy at? The
Yeah,
MC the
the
wedding.
old guy with the podcast.
Yeah, you should have been MCing. You would have
Ah,
They would have sprayed you, which is like throwing money on you.
oh, I was gonna say it
Yeah.
sounded a little strange for a little bit. Hey, we really like you. Let's urinate all over you.
I knew I had to clarify it after I
Yeah.
said it. I was like, yeah, spraying in Nigeria and Zimbabwe is throwing money on you while you're celebrating the bride and groom. But yeah, like when did you fall in love with comedy?
You know, it was really an accident. I mean, my father had a great sense of humor, and I think I had a decent sense of humor. But as you mentioned, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I started my first company when I was 17. It was a small construction company, and I sold out of that, and I went to Spinning Records. I know you do a lot of shows on music and rap and stuff. Well, I don't want to shock anybody in your audience, LaTroy, but I was spinning records before disco came out. I was spinning disco records for dance parties and weddings and bar mitzvahs, and did that for a few years. And in 1979, I went on vacation, and there was a small satellite room for the Comedy Store in a place called Westwood, California. It was just outside of UCLA, the university. And my dad said, "Hey, you got to go check this out." And stand-up comedy wasn't really known. I don't know if your listeners understand, but stand-up comedy before 1980 was the thing that was the entertainment between strippers at a strip club, or between jazz bands at a jazz club. While they were switching out instruments, they'd throw a comic up. It wasn't really mainstream at all. And so I went to this comedy club and met Dave Coulier from Full House and Fuller House.
Mm-hmm.
Also Sandra Bernhardt and George Wallace, who had his own show in Vegas for about 12 years. And I was just enthralled with it. It was like, wow, this stand-up comedy, it's not like just watching a show like a movie or a television show. When you're in the audience in a stand-up comedy show, it's live. There's an energy, there's an exchange between the entertainer and the audience. And that moment will never live again and never happened previously. It's a special moment. And I was like just captivated by it. And my 6-hour drive back home after that vacation, and I should mention for clarification, I took my then girlfriend, soon to be wife, soon to be ex-wife. So it was a
Wow.
special trip. But anyway, I came back to Sacramento, my hometown, and I quit my job, and I went bankrupt, so I had no debt. And I went back down to LA and to San Francisco and talked to comedy club owners and waitresses and comics, kind of researched. Like that's how I started all my businesses. You got to do a little work up front so you know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then by the grace of God, I wheeled and dealed my way into the banquet room of a nice restaurant for free and started producing shows. And Dave Coulier introduced me to Bob Saget. And Bob Saget and Dave Coulier really gave me a foundation in stand-up comedy, but they introduced me to Gary Shandling, who introduced me to Jerry Seinfeld, and Jay Leno. It just went on and on. And once I got into the industry, the comics wanted me to succeed. Now, I should tell your audience, LaTroy, when I opened my club, it was called Laughs Unlimited,
Right.
all comedy showroom. There was only 12. I was the 12th. That's 12 full-time comedy club in the entire United States. Now, I will share that by 1985, stand-up comedy had blown up. It was all over late night TV. Every disco turned into a comedy club. And instead of one in two in a state, there was one or two in every city. So there was the boom of stand-up comedy. And I would say, by the grace of God, I got in before that wave and rode that wave and made a lot of money.
Right. Yeah, and I'll say, just from your story, as an entrepreneur, just the making that initial connection with Dave Coulier and how that led to Bob Saget and beyond. Just speak on the importance of the networking aspect of entrepreneurship.
I think anything you do, you have to build a community around, and those people can be so helpful. I mentioned when I was 17, my first company was a small construction company. I didn't know what the heck I was doing. So once I decided I was going to give this a shot and open a business, it was called A&A Restripe. We painted lines in parking lots. I visited the competitors and I met the owners and I asked them, where'd you get your paint and where do you get your machine and how much do you charge? And people, successful people especially, love to talk about their success. And so nobody was afraid I was going to be their competition. I was a 17-year-old kid. So they loved to share all that information. It was the same when I was 24 and opened the comedy club. I talked to all these other club owners and managers, and they were happy to share, here's who you work with. Here's who to avoid. This is what you charge. This is how much you pay the comics. In the beginning, Dave Coulier and Bob Saget, who were not famous at all, they were just getting started, were telling me how much to pay the comics. I had, how lucky was I that they were honest and told me the fair amount, because they could have said, oh, you should pay us all $5,000, and I would have never made it. So instead, my very first week, my very first show was August 7th of 1980, before you were born. And
barely.
My very first comic to hit the stage flew in from Phoenix. It was his very first road gig. I paid him $150 for a whole week of work, was Gary Shandling.
Okay.
And if you don't know Gary, Google him, because you'll see the Larry Sanders Show, the Gary Shandling Show, and I think he did like 50 movies.
Uh-huh.
But he worked for me for $100.
Right. I heard that you have an interesting story tied to Gary.
Oh, yeah. Well, can I share it with your audience?
Yeah, sure.
So Gary Shandling was a very funny comic. He had not gotten any TV exposure or movie exposure yet. He was just still learning the trade. He was the opening act, as I mentioned. He soon headlined. He was very, very good. But it was a Wednesday night. I had just gotten my business started, so we didn't have huge crowds. And LaTroy, I'm not kidding, it was like a Wednesday night. There's maybe 12 people in the audience. And, show business, you always do a show. Doesn't matter how many people are there. And Gary's about halfway through his set, and this guy gets up and goes to the restroom. And once the guy left the room, Gary pauses and he looks at the audience and he goes, that's way too high a percentage of the audience. Come with me. Right? So he gets all the couples, men and women, marches them down the hall to the men's room, goes into the men's room, and here's this poor guy at the urinal doing his business. Gary walks in, stands right behind him. All 11 other people cram into the bathroom, and he just goes on with a set like nothing had happened. And this poor guy's trying to finish his business. And it never happened again. It only happened once. It was an amazing moment. As I mentioned, stand-up comedy is all about moments, and it was hilarious. Oh, and I do want to make sure the audience knows we made sure he washed his hands.
Okay. Yeah. Got to be sanitary here.
Oh, but Gary, that was what was great about Gary Shandling. He was so natural with the audiences and so funny.
Uh-huh. So, how long did it take from the inception of Laugh Unlimited to really gain that momentum to where you were getting, the rising comics or just having, consistency?
Well, I was losing money for about 6 months and begging from Peter and paying Paul to get by. as I mentioned, I'd gone bankrupt, so I had no money. I was doing this by the seat of my pants. In fact, I mentioned the banquet room of the restaurant I opened my club in. I didn't have to pay rent because I made a deal with them that they would sell the food and the drink and I would get the door. And so I negotiated an opportunity to use a banquet room, turn it into a showroom for free. So, you know, I was smart about those things. And then I used the door money to pay the comics. I didn't make any money. I had no employees originally. But as I mentioned, I caught on as a club, and then comedy caught on. And that was in 1980. By 1985, I had 3 clubs, 2 here in Sacramento and 1 in Stockton, California. I had 104 employees, and we had some of the biggest names in show business coming through. One of the fun people that hit my stage was Robin Williams. From Monty Python, we had Graham Chapman. For the old school people out there, I had Soupy Sales and Pat Paulson. And for the new hipper people, I had, as I mentioned, Dana Carvey, Jerry Seinfeld, Jay Leno. And one of the interesting ones, I have a great story. I don't know how much time we have, LaTroy. You have a quick time for a quick story?
Yeah, keep going out. I'll guide you. I'll let you know when we're running short. Go ahead.
Well, one of the guys that actually never worked for me, but I have an interesting personal relationship with, is Sinbad.
Okay.
You know Sinbad, the stand-up
Yeah.
comic and movie star. I had a stalker. There was this young guy that wanted to be a comic. He would come to my club all the time, and he would always ask me questions, and I was there helping people. We had an open mic. We actually had a school in the club on Monday nights to help people learn to be comics. And this guy, wanted to do something, and I was also a very honest producer, and I said, no, you're not funny enough yet. You need more experience. And I got this 4-page letter. I'm not kidding, LaTroy, 4 pages handwritten. And in the beginning of the letter, he was threatening my life, threatened to burn down the club, was calling me every name in the book. And by the end of the 4 pages, he loved me. He thought show business was his future, and he was very appreciative of all the help I gave him. So this guy's a nutcase, right? So put that aside. About a year goes by, and I'm working the club, and I get a phone call, and my staff answers the phone and says, Sinbad's on the phone. I go, Sinbad, the comic and movie star? What's he want with me?
Yeah.
And I pick up the phone, and Sinbad goes, hey, this is Sinbad. And I go, wow, hey, thanks for calling. I used to work with a lot of celebrities, so I didn't gush all over him. I was very professional. And I said, how can I help you, sir? And he said, well, I've got this weird 6-page letter from a guy. And in the beginning of the letter, he's stalking me and he's threatening to kill me. And he gets very descriptive, calls me every name in the book. And by the end of the letter, he's telling me how much he loves me as an actor and how he looks up to me as a stand-up comic. And I said, yeah, I know that guy. And Sinbad was very concerned. He didn't know if he should call the FBI or report it. And I said, look, I know this guy. He's a little whacked, but he's harmless. He sent me the same type of letter. I would just ignore it. And he goes, wow, I was really concerned. Thank you so much. And I'm going to take your advice and assume that, my life is safe. But we had a nice phone conversation, but it was a little interesting because it was based on this wacko and these letters. Well, now fast forward about 5 years, and Sinbad was performing at another club in town, and I had gone to meet with the manager of that club for different business, and not knowing Sinbad was there. And I walk in, and the manager says, come on into my office. And sitting in the office was Sinbad. And I, of course, you can't help but recognize this guy, right? He's done several movies,
Right.
great comedy star on TV. And I said, "Oh, Sinbad, great to meet you." And and he was, puffing up a little bit and a little bit of that showbiz. Yeah, yeah, all right, nice to meet you. Like he could give a rat's ass.
Right.
And I said, we have a personal connection. And he goes, and he kind of gives me this query look. And I go, "Remember the guy that threatened your life?" And he goes, "Oh, Scott. Oh, yeah, yeah." And then it was like we were best friends, right? He went from
Uh-huh.
being this kind of, don't bother me, I'm the star kind of thing to, wow, you really helped me. And that was so difficult. And I was scared. And you did it. Oh, and we sat and talked for about half an hour. It was hilarious. But he never actually worked my club. But I have a very personal connection with Sinbad as we were both life threatened.
Right. So has any comedians that ended up making it big, did they make their debut at Laugh Unlimited?
Well, all these guys were working for me before they got famous. I
Okay.
name dropped quite a few. In fact, Dana Carvey, who was out of the Bay Area, you guys may know him from Wayne's World and a number
Hmm.
of TV appearances. He was Saturday Night Live,
Yeah,
for example.
SNL.
Right. So Dana was one of my regular headliners. Very, very funny guy. In fact, one time did a lot of musical comedy. If you've seen him on Saturday Night Live and some of his other stuff, he always does music. And uh, he brought his brother's band in, and he and his brother's band worked for a whole week. And they were singing songs like "Choppin' Broccoli" and a couple others that are famous, the Burger King song. And it was a great show. We were good friends. And one Thursday night, I guess it was a Thursday night, we were after the show, we're hanging out with a couple young ladies in a jacuzzi and late night party kind of stuff, intimate crowd. And Dana goes, "Scott, I just had a phone call." And I go, "Hey, great." He goes, "It was Lorne Michaels. He just called and asked me to come to New York on Monday to try out for Saturday Night Live." I go, "That's incredible." And he goes, "I don't know if I'm ready." He was nervous, but, also really excited. But I was so excited for him. It kind of got him over the doubting himself, and we just had a great party that night because it was incredible. And of course he went to Saturday Night Live and showcased for Lorne Michaels on that Monday, and of course got the spot and was on this show that next season. Another great story, if your people are interested in celebrity, another one of my regulars was Jerry Seinfeld, and he had to cancel a week once, and that happened a lot in the business. And he called me up and he goes, "Hey Scott, I got to cancel this week. I'm doing a pilot." And I said, "Great, well, good luck. I hope the show gets bought." And that turned out to be the first year of the Seinfeld show, which of
Hmm.
course we all know did pretty well.
Yeah.
And yeah, it
Still
was
in
okay.
syndication. Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
And what was really great, LaTroy, was that after the first season, I got a phone call from Jerry and he goes, "Hey, I owe you a week." Now he's famous from the show. And he calls me up. He's such a straight up guy. And he came back and worked my club for the same money I had contracted him for over a year before, and held his contract. And it was amazing. The audience was just shocked that he was working the club, but it was so much fun.
Yeah, I mean Jerry still seems like he's very down to earth. Like he'll catch a Yankees or a Knicks game, and just pretty much keep
Yeah.
it New York to the fullest. Um,
Exactly. In fact, a couple of these guys are so in. We were talking about the passion for what you do. Some people used stand-up comedy to get a sitcom or to get into movies, and then they became actors, and that was it. They never did comedy again. Both Jerry Seinfeld and Jay Leno, who were regulars at my club, I won't say they got started at my club, but it was very early in their careers. Love the industry so much. They're still out touring. These guys are filthy, filthy rich. They have no reason to get up on stage, but they have a passion and they love stand-up comedy and that energy you get from an audience. And they're both still touring. I think that's really impressive.
Right.
Dr. Todd McLean provides periodontal and dental implant services in 2 convenient locations. They offer over a decade of experience treating patients, and appointments can even be scheduled in the evenings, weekends, or early mornings. Give them a call in Chapel Hill at 919-537-9774 or in Durham at 919-484-8338 or visit them online at gumsandimplants.org.
All right, so you've seen them all. You've seen all of the greats. You've seen those that have, had opportunities and fumbled. What separates those that succeed from those that fail?
Part of it is the passion, but I think that what people don't realize, especially about show business, and you may have heard this before, LaTroy, because you're in the industry, but people talk about overnight success because they go from being nobody to being famous. Marilyn Monroe or some of these others have talked about it in Hollywood. What a lot of the normal people don't, the muggles don't know, is that it takes a lot of hard work and takes a lot of time. So that overnight success was probably years in the making. As I mentioned, all these guys I'm name dropping worked for years on my stage and other small stages to build their craft, to get better at writing, get better at interacting with audiences, taking that lump of coal that they wrote and turned it into a gem of a comedy bit, and to take them to success. And so I think the thing that people need to realize is it's a lot of hard work and takes time. These things don't happen overnight. One of my greatest moments, he wasn't a paid act, but one night Robin Williams dropped into the club, and Bob Saget was the headliner. And I went up on stage about halfway through Bob's set and said, "Hey, we're going to interrupt the show." And Bob was pissed. That's his moment, right? It's his hour on the stage. And I said, "I hope you understand." And I bumped Saget, and I introduced and brought up Robin Williams. And he did, almost a 40-minute free set for that audience that was there, blown away everybody. He was already famous. And what was interesting about Robin was everybody knows on stage he's hyperkinetic, man. He just joke. His theory was, I'm going to put out 100 jokes, and if you like 60 of them, I'm doing well, because it's also machine gun style rapid fire. But what a lot of people didn't know was that as soon as he got off stage, Robin was very quiet, demure. He was not on. I know a lot of comics that whether they're on stage or in the green room, you know what I'm talking about, LaTroy? They're on. They want to be the funniest guy in the room, and they're always trying to get attention. Robin was just the opposite. He sat quietly. He loved people in the industry, so he would sit and talk to the other comics. And it was a special moment to have him at my club.
Yeah. So I know Kevin Hart, the name of one of his comedy specials was called Laugh at My Pain. And I've often heard that comedians, a lot of their funny comes from the fact that their real life is miserable. Like, they've endured a lot. Is that something that you witnessed with any of the comedians?
Oh, sure. And this is, and think about it, LaTroy. This is back in the 80s. So there were some guys fighting drug addiction. There was some early alcoholics that were trying to survive their dependence on things to have a career. And there's some that didn't make it, some that there's a few stories of suicide and people giving up on their dreams because it is hard work, it is difficult, and not everybody makes it. And absolutely true that anybody in the stand-up comedy business, almost everybody, I would say a high percentage, has some angst or difficulties in their family life. Now, let me ask you, LaTroy, we're on opposite ends of the country. We know thousands of people. Wouldn't you say that that without a stretch, that every family's got shit going on?
Oh, definitely.
Right? I mean, that's just it. Whether you're growing up in a one parent family, or challenging for money, or maybe there's plenty of money, but you got a really strict parentage. There's all these different things we grow up in that define who we are as adults. And I think what's great about stand-up comedy, and stand-up comics in particular as entertainers, is that they take that pain and they take those experiences and they find the funny in it. Now, I'll give you a quick example. We both know a lot of really famous singers, and they may have easy or tough lives, but they go out and they sing a song, and there might be something in the lyrics, but really it's the melody and the beat that people really remember and attach to. And actors, they go out and read other people's lines. They don't even write the material, right? They're just reading what somebody else wrote. So there's no personal experience tied to what they're saying. Stand-up comedy, I don't mean to get too deep here, but I do have a passion for it, is the only entertainment format that's real, where the comics write the material, engage with an audience, and talk about the good and bad in everyone's life. And that's what makes the connection between the audience and the entertainer so poignant and so meaningful. As I mentioned earlier on, every show is a moment. I booked shows 6 nights a week, 2 shows on the weekends. So you're talking 8 shows, 10 shows a week sometimes. And the acts don't change their show necessarily every day. A good comic has a set, right? He knows what he's going to do. But also a good comic connects with the audience and can pivot and react to the audience's reactions. And that makes each of those shows, even though they're similar, it makes them unique. And that's one of the outstanding aspects of stand-up comedy. Now, I went a little bit down a rabbit hole, but I hope it was interesting.
Nah, this is all interesting to me. So like you said, you started Laugh Unlimited right before the boom, experienced the heyday of stand-up comedy, where a lot of the stars pivoted into television and movies. Today, where do you feel we stand when it comes to the industry, as far as well, it's 2 parts. One, the social media aspect, and then 2, cancel culture and being PC.
Yeah. Well, you tapped into, and this is what makes you such a great host, LaTroy. You are paying attention and know what you're going to ask, and those are great questions. One of the reasons I sold out of my business, and I loved it and had a passion for it, was that after 2020, it was actually 2001, after 2001, things started changing, and that's when I made the decision to get out. And what it was stand-up comedy had been exploited to the point where, as I mentioned, there was a club in every corner. Every late night show had stand-up comedy. There was Evening at the Improv and Live at the Comedy Store, all these TV shows. When I was doing it in the 80s and 90s, it was still pretty special and new and fresh. And by 2001, it was starting to get abused, and the comics were not putting in the work. They were just saying what they thought would get them on TV or be salacious. They would start getting dirtier or more political, trying to shock the audience instead of being real and talking about, things that everybody in the audience could relate to. I think that that has changed, and in my humble mind, ruined stand-up comedy. When you are trying to be woke and go up on stage and do comedy that's engaging and interacting with an audience, if you're not pushing the envelope a little bit, Bobcat Goldthwait was great at that. And there's been a few, Richard Pryor. I mean, they would always take it one step a little farther to find the funny. It was always funny, but it made the audience a little uneasy and happy at the same time. You know what I mean? Poking fun.
Mhm.
Don Rickles was a great example of picked on everybody, but it was meant to say, I'm picking on everybody because we're all humans and we all have something funny about us, right? Don Rickles couldn't do his comedy in this day and age. Everybody would be offended and everybody's feelings, we can't be hurt, and we're all little snowflakes. And if you say something rude, my life is over. And it's like, oh crap, just, get a skin, right? And then you talked about social media. It drives me nuts because I mentioned this earlier. I'm sorry to repeat myself, but a good stand-up comic works hard. He gets on stage every moment he can. He's always trying new material. He writes a bit and he's going to say it over and over and over with different audiences to find exactly the funniest parts of that bit. And then he moves on to the next bit. He has to build like a pyramid. He has to build these bits on top of each other, these comic lines to get a set, right? And in the comedy club business, an opening act does maybe 10, 15 minutes. That's a long time on stage. A feature act does maybe half an hour, and a headliner does 45 minutes to an hour. Jay Leno used to easily bang out an hour and a half and not even take a breath. He was so funny and had so much material. But in this day and age with social media, there are people that create videos where they only have to be funny for 15 or 30 seconds, maybe a minute if they push it. And here's the funny part, LaTroy. Some of these people get so many followers because they can be funny for 30 seconds, get gigs at clubs and concerts. Here's Billy Joe Bob from Facebook, and he's got 2 million followers because he does, these funny videos, and they pay him $10,000 to go up on stage. And guess what? These shitheads aren't funny at all. They know how to make a little short video, but they don't know how to put bits together. They don't know how to entertain for half an hour or an hour. I mean, $10,000, you got to have some material, right? And these dimwits, just know how to drop a bucket of poop on their head and get people to laugh. That as a producer drives me nuts because they didn't put in the work. They're not engaging with an audience. They're engaging with a camera, the one-eyed monster. They're not interacting with an audience. They're not building a rapport. They're just doing something stupid on a camera. So social media has weakened comedy, and I think wokeness weakened comedy, and that's why I'm depressed.
Right. I mean, so do you feel like with that, like our legends, that gives them more longevity because, this new crop of talent
is thin?
Is thin or short circuit 30 seconds, 60 seconds, and they're not able to carry a sitcom or go on Saturday Night Live or do movies.
You made a great point there. How many people have we seen that are really funny in the last decade that have gotten their own TV sitcom or show? It just isn't happening. There's no talent development anymore. I mean, you're a producer, I'm a producer. Our job is to find talented people and put them in a format that entertains other people. And if you don't have that because of social media or because of wokeness, you lose that opportunity to develop talent. And you're absolutely correct. I do want to remind people that you can still see good, connectable, engaging stand-up comedy because Jerry Seinfeld's still on tour. Leno's still on tour. There's still a few acts, Chris Rock and a few others that'll come out and do a show that you mentioned, Kevin Hart. There's some good people that worked. They didn't just become stars. All the people I'm mentioning worked for years before they got famous in the industry. They're still performing, but there's not really anybody new that I can think of that's really exciting and provocative and getting the laughs that people did in the 80s. Of course, I'm an old guy and a little prejudiced, so.
Uh-huh. So I definitely want to make time for this, but you said you left the comedy club industry, and now you're doing clean comedy fundraisers. Just talk about that pivot and
Well, that's
how.
LaTroy, that's just selfishness. I just love the industry. I miss producing shows. I didn't do it for a while. I actually, after the comedy clubs and stuff, I owned a medium-sized insurance agency. Talk about boring for about 15 years. It made me good money, but it was not, I missed the show business. But all during those years, I would do a couple fundraisers for charities each year. And so when I retired, I started Clean Comedy Fundraisers as an opportunity to keep my toes in the fringes show business. And I produce comedy shows for charities. Now, what's interesting, the reason I push it as clean comedy is that we were talking about with the weakening of the comedy nature and with wokeness and stuff, people aren't doing the kind of comedy that's engaging for all the audience, right? They tend to focus in, I'm going to make all the Italians in the audience laugh, or I'm going to work my audience to a black audience, or I'm going to go to a sports audience. They don't try to make everybody have a good time and talk about the funny parts of everyone's life like other people do. That I've mentioned, some of the comics, and it's difficult to get that going without being clean. And so, because I know 1,000 entertainers, I know the 10 or 20 that can entertain for an hour and never drop an F-bomb. They're still really funny. I know some people think you can't be funny without dropping F-bombs, but it is possible. And so I know the guys that can, Kermit Apio and Steve Bruner and Mark Yaffe. There's plenty of them that are out there that can entertain an audience, whether it's a charity or a church audience or a television audience, and not piss off people and drop F-bombs. Now, it doesn't mean they're not edgy. They can still be edgy, but they're just not crass. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm happy we got through that. I feel like sometimes I'm going down a rabbit hole, and I appreciate you go along with me, LaTroy. I feel really happy that there is a thing called editing.
Oh yeah, yeah. Which, I mean, we don't do a lot of that unless it's a Wi-Fi. So we pretty much give the audience, everything from
that could be scary.
A to Z. Yeah. So, like, how can, if somebody such as myself wanted to have one of these clean comedy fundraisers, how can we make that happen?
Well, I still produce. There's a website, cleancomedyfundraisers.com. I also have my podcast, Stand Up Comedy, your host and MC, which is the way I was introduced as an MC. I emceed all my shows over 20 years, so I've had a lot of stage time. But my podcast, I have a short form comedy podcast called Comedy Appetizers. That's good for a little 5-7 minute segments of comedy. All these things can be contacted through the internet. The most exciting, though, is you have your Forecast Media Network. I started the Stand Up Comedy Podcast Network. That's Stand Up Comedy Podcast Network.com. And it's a free app on all Android and Apple phones. So it's a free app. You can download it. And if you go to it, there's about a dozen podcasts all about comedy and all funny. There's some great videos, Dave Coulier and Bob Saget on stage, other people. And there's blogs for people that like to read. There's all kinds of things. So if you get a chance, check out Stand Up Comedy Podcast Network.
Okay. Yay. Stand Up Comedy Podcast Network. So who do you have on your comedy Mount Rushmore?
Oh, well, there's one I love to say that people don't know the name as much as they should. But if the audience uses the Googler, go and research Larry Miller. Larry Miller, he used to be one of the 10 funniest people in the Universe Club in New York with Jerry Seinfeld and Paul Reiser and a few others. But Larry Miller had to be one of the funniest guys. By the way, the minute you look at his face, you go, oh, him. He's literally been in like 100 movies.
Mm-hmm.
But his stand-up comedy by far was the purest over the years. But I also had a taste for the old school. I was very good friends and always enjoyed Pat Paulson. A lot of people don't remember him from the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, but he actually ran for president twice, so he's perfect for this year. And then I would still have to say to me, the purest, the people that brought entertainment no matter what. And I think Dana Carvey, a lot of people don't realize he was able to do music. He would do impressions. He could do pure stand-up comedy. He was an all-in-one entertainment hero for me. Very, very funny guy.
Okay.
That's 3. Is that enough?
Yeah, that's 3. You putting yourself on there?
That's not going to happen. But some people thought I was funny, and I did get a lot of stage time, but I always tried to separate myself. LaTroy, I'm a producer. I like to find and develop comedy, and even though I could be funny on stage, I didn't write material. I didn't make a point of being the entertainer. I just like being around the industry. One of the fun acts that we had came in as a feature act. For those that don't know, comedy clubs have an opening act, feature act, headliner. One of my fun feature acts that came in and I thought had a lot of talent, and your audience may have heard of her, Ellen DeGeneres. Yeah. She did okay, I think.
I think she did pretty well. Talk show, sitcom.
My club a few times, and as a feature act, she hadn't even reached the status of headliner, but you could spot the talent. Another one was Paula Poundstone, who went on to a whole career of comedy. These were a couple women, happened a lot with men, but a couple women that you could just tell they had the it factor.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So, what's something about you that people find most surprising?
That I'm still alive? No, I think one that I do enjoy getting on stage, even though I'm shy and quiet. And but I'm a gamer. I play Call of Duty and Tiger Woods and different games, and I play golf. I mean, I try to be multi-dimensional. Oh, here's something, LaTroy, that your audience might get a kick out of. I had a lot of success in the 80s and made a lot of money. There was good money there in the Reagan years, for those of you that want to look up your history. I built and owned a submarine.
Okay.
I actually had my own submarine. I launched it in Santa Cruz, California, and it was a tourist submarine. We'd take tourists out and show them the kelp forest and the sea otters and the sea lions and the fish, the pelagic fish in the bay. And it was just something weird. I lost my ass financially. It was really bad.
All right. I hear that. All right. So as we prepare to wrap up, if you wanted to, plug everything again real fast, and then I needed
it was, check out my podcast, Stand-Up Comedy, your host and MC. I do interviews with the famous and not so famous in the industry. I also provide a lot of great comedy sets, comedy appetizers for those that like short bits of comedy. And the fun thing, you do a lot of different stuff, LaTroy. You're very successful with your network, and you were telling me about all the different shows you do. A few months back, launched my first and only children's podcast. It's aimed at, I'm a grandfather. I love to entertain kids, but they're all got their face in a phone. And I wanted to do a podcast for children. So mine's aimed at ages 3 to 8. It's called Ock's Amazing Adventures. That's Ock, AAWK, Ock's Amazing Adventures. And if you're a parent or a grandparent and you want your children to use their imagination and be entertained, they're only like 3 to 5 minutes long each, but there's some great stories on that podcast for children. And thanks for asking, because it is nice to be able to plug that. I'm very excited about it.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds interesting. Before we go for real this time, Danny Tanner. So yeah, I'm an '80s baby, and
Bob Saget.
Full House. Danny Tanner, Bob Saget is squeaky clean. It was a rude awakening for me.
Did you see him
his stand up? Yeah, seeing his stand up, and he's dropping F-bombs like crazy. But it was the funniest thing ever. So did you see that, Bob Saget?
Oh, definitely. He developed, he was one of the acts that helped me get started, and I helped him. We helped each other in our early careers. Bob Saget was one of the filthiest comics ever, but was always funny. And even though there was a few F-bombs, he didn't use F-bombs as a punchline. It was pure funny. It was just sex humor and blowjob humor and poop humor. I mean, he was incredible. And a lot of people don't know he was a really gifted musician, and he used to write dirty songs, dirty limericks and play them with his guitar. In fact, if you go to my podcast network, Stand Up Comedy Podcast Network, there's some videos of him performing, and you'll see and hear what he was like. And it was so funny because we were such good friends. He came back several times after the success of Full House, and we would always have these moms call up and go, "I want to bring my kids to the show." And we're like, "No!" We would ruin them forever. They would expect to see Danny Tanner, and they would have gotten Bob Saget, raw and funny as he was.
Oh yeah. Yeah, like I said, when I saw the raw, uncut Bob Saget, I was caught off guard, but pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, he was a true gift. We were so sorry to lose him, and a great friend, and he was so instrumental to my success and getting me going in the business. And he and Dave Coulier, in particular, were meaningful friends in that time of my life. So thanks for asking, LaTroy, and thanks for having me on your podcast. You're doing a great job.
Oh, no problem. Thank you for being a guest this week, Scott. I mean, like you said, you've seen it all. You've seen it all in your 40 plus years in the industry, and just hearing these stories from our legends, and then just your interesting perspective as far as being able to pivot and do the clean comedy fundraisers and the podcast network. This was fun. So,
I'm glad you enjoyed it. I enjoyed being here. And ladies and gentlemen, continue listening to LaTroy in this amazing show. Woo! It's incredible. He's crazy. Okay, that's enough. He's not that good.
Yeah. In the words of Dave Coulier, cut it out.
That's a great reference. Oh, good for you. A lot of people don't remember that reference. Oh, that's great. Perfect way to end the show.
All right. So thanks again, Scott. And for Stop, Look, and Listen, I'm your host, LaTroy Gardner. See you next week. Peace and blessings.